Well, I'm not sure exactly what you all know about me, but I'm Michael Croth. I'm faculty in adult organizational learning and leadership here in Boise, and I am extremely honored and privileged to have this opportunity to speak for Banned Books. And I am so excited that the college and the university and the library is sponsoring this week. I'm a child of the 1960s, and so we're familiar with protests. We're familiar with those times when it is important that people be allowed to speak things which aren't necessarily popular. I'm also a theater major. I have a degree in theater arts, and so the ability to speak freely, the ability to express yourself in ways which are not generally accepted has always been the province of the arts. And it's no different for these banned books, which have, over the length of time, as I'm sure you're all very well aware, have made a considerable impact on our society because people are allowed to speak. And any abridgment of that, any censorship, any of those types of things is a challenge to our democracy. And so libraries, education, universities are places where should be bastions of places for free speech. So I'm excited and privileged to be here today. I'm even more thrilled to have the opportunity, and I want to thank the folks, Cassie and Allie and everybody who allowed me to do this, a little innovative way, new way for me to speak from afar. I'm even more pleased to be able to talk and read from this book, which is The Grapes of Wrath. The Grapes of Wrath, I know that Of Mice and Men was just read before me by the Dean Hunter, and so I think this is a good follow-up to that. John Steinbeck is my favorite author of all time, and as you can tell, this book has been around my house for a long time. The cover's coming off. I had to tape it. You can see my name, Mike Croth, which I wrote. It must have been a high school book. I also brought my other book, Catch-22, which I've had since that period of time as well. These books have made such a huge difference in my own life, and so I'm glad to be able to read from them. And just to put this in a little more context, The Grapes of Wrath took place in the 1930s Depression, Oklahoma, when farmers and people were tossed off their lands in the Dust Bowl of Oklahoma, were known as Okies, and took the trek west towards California. My mom was a Dust Bowl child of the 1930s, and in fact, her family got tossed off her farm and were faced with the possibility that she too would be one of those migrants moving to California. And she sent all of us kids a note in 2007, and I've got it here. I've kept it. But one of the things that she sent us was a picture of, and I have it here today, I actually framed it. It's a picture of Okies driving to California during the Great Depression. And this is from the Farm Security Administration. Farmers whose topsoil blew away joined the sod caravans of Okies on Route 66 to California around 1935. And if you look here closely, you will see that she wrote here, and this is kind of her signature, she wrote, "Not us."
Not us.
Not us. And you can imagine that a half a century later, that fear of having to pack up the family and move to California was so strong that she was still sending us, "Not us." There, but for the grace of God. Fortunately, her Uncle Gus hired my grandfather, and my grandfather was able to own a gas station, small gas station in Winfield, Kansas. And my mom had a picture drawn, and it's here of the gas station, and you can see that gas was 19 cents a gallon, something very inexpensive. But you can see this little gas station, and Mom called this God's grace. God's grace, because there, but for the grace of God, our family would have been off to California, mattress on top of the car. And I just reread her note this morning. It made me teary-eyed, I have to say. Today I'm going to read from the Grapes of Wrath, written by the great John Steinbeck. He won a Pulitzer Prize. He also won the National Book Award for this, and then later, of course, the Nobel Prize. This is about the oppressed folks moving to California, and I'll just read one quote from him, and then I'll start doing my job here, and actually reading from the book itself. Despite its critical and popular acclaim upon its release, there were very heated outcries against the novel and the author spanning the entire social and political spectrum of the United States. The novel literally fueled the fires of public debate as local communities burned copies in protest. When Steinbeck was preparing the novel, to write the novel, he famously wrote, and this is the role of artists and the role of novelists and the role of free speech in our society. He famously wrote, "I want to put a tag of shame on the greedy bastards who are responsible for this, the Great Depression and its effects. I've done my damnedest to rip a reader's nerves to rags." It is the role of the arts to bring these issues up in ways that others cannot. So I'm starting reading from chapter 5, and this is where the farmers find out and their families find out that they're going to be tossed off the farm, and I'll read a short selection from that. I think I've got 9 or 10 minutes left from that, and then I'm going to move to a couple other sections. I haven't timed this, so I don't really know how long this will take. Chapter 5. The owners of the land came onto the land, or more often, the spokesman for the owners came. They came in closed cars, and they felt the dry earth with their fingers, and sometimes they drove the big earth augers into the ground for soil tests. The tenants, from their sun-beaten dooryards, watched uneasily when the closed cars drove along the fields. And at last the owner men drove into the dooryards and sat in their cars to talk out the windows. The tenant men stood beside the cars for a while and then squatted on their hams and found sticks with which to mark the dust. In the open doors, the women stood looking out, and behind them the children, corn-headed children, with wide eyes, one barefoot on top of the other barefoot and toes working. The women and the children watched their men talking to the owner men. They were silent. Some of the owner men were kind because they hated what they had to do, and some of them were angry because they hated to be cruel, and some of them were cold because they had long ago found that one could not be an owner unless one were cold. And all of them were caught in something larger than themselves. Some of them hated the mathematics that drove them, and some were afraid, and some worshiped the mathematics because it provided a refuge from thought and from feeling. If a bank or a finance company owned the land, the owner man said, the bank or the company needs, wants, insists, must have, as though the bank or the company were a monster with thought and feeling which had ensnared them. These last would take no responsibility for the banks or the companies because they were men and slaves, while the banks were machines and masters all at the same time. Some of the ownermen were a little proud to be slaves to such cold and powerful masters. The ownermen sat in cars and explained, "You know the land is poor, you've scrabbled at it long enough, God knows." The squatting tenant men nodded and wondered and drew figures in the dust, and yes, they knew, God knows, if only the dust only wouldn't fly, if the top would only stay on the soil, it might not be so bad. The ownermen went on, leading to their point. You know the land's getting poorer. You know what cotton does to the land, robs it, sucks it of all the blood out of it. The squatters nodded. They knew. God knew. If they could only rotate the crops, they might pump blood back into the land. Well, it's too late. And the ownermen explained the workings and the thinkings of the monster that was stronger than they were. A man can hold land if he can just eat and pay taxes. He can do that. Yes, he can do that until the crops fail one day and he has to borrow money from the bank. But you see, a bank can't do that because those creatures don't breathe air, don't eat side meat. They breathe profits. They eat interest on money. If they don't get it, they die the way you die without air, without side meat. It's a sad thing, but it's so. The squatting men raised their eyes to understand. Can't we just hang on? Maybe the next year will be a good year. God knows how much cotton next year. And with all the wars, God knows what price cotton will bring. Don't they make explosives out of cotton? Uniforms? Get enough wars and cotton will hit the ceilings next year, maybe. They looked up questioningly. We can't depend on it. The bank, the monster has to have profits all the time. It can't wait. It'll die. No, taxes go on. When the monster stops growing, it dies. It can't stay one size. The squatting men looked down again. What do you want us to do? We can't take less share of the crop. We're half starved now. The kids are hungry all the time. We got no clothes, torn and ragged. If all the neighbors weren't the same, we'd be ashamed to go to the meeting. And at last, the owner man came to the point. The tenant system won't work anymore. One man on a tractor can take the place of 12 or 14 families, pay him a wage, and take all the crop. We have to do it. We don't like to do it, but the monster's sick. Something happened to the monster. But you'll kill the land with cotton. We know. We got to take cotton quick before the land dries. Then we'll sell the land. Lots of families in the East would like to own a piece of land. The tenant men looked up alarmed. What will happen to us? How will we eat? You'll have to get off the land. The plows will go through the dooryard. And now the squatting men stood up angrily. Grandpa took up the land, and he had to kill the Indians and drive them away. And Pa was born here, and he killed weeds and snakes. And then a bad year came, and we had to borrow a little money. And then we was born here, there in the door. Our children were born here, and Pa had to borrow money. The bank owned the land then, but we stayed, and we got a little bit of what we raised. We know all that, but it's not us, it's the bank. A bank isn't like a man or an owner with 50,000 acres. He isn't like a man either. That's the monster. Sure, cried the tenant men, but it's our land. We measured it and broke it up. We were born on it, and we got killed on it, died on it. Even if it's no good, it's still ours. That's what makes it ours, being born on it, working it, dying on it. That makes ownership, no matter what paper and numbers say. So I'll stop right there. But the story goes on, and they are knocked off their land. They head to California. They have to sell everything they own in auction. They end up in California, and I'm going to only have time to read one more quick section, but this is the last part of the book. When they're in California, Tom Joad, he's the son. Tom, Ma, Pa, Joad family. He's killed a man, and he's on the run. He's a fugitive. Family's starving. And he's talking to his ma here as we finish this book. Let me see where we are. She's Ma hears a stealthy step. Tom's been hiding. Ma heard a stealthy step among the leaves to her left, and she grew tense. She raised her knees and straightened her head the better to hear. The movement stopped, and after a long moment began again. A vine rasped harshly on the dry leaves. Ma saw a dark figure creep into the open and draw near to the culvert. The black round hole was obscured for a moment, and then the figure moved back. She called softly, Tom. The figure stood still, so low to the ground that it might have been a stump. She called again, Tom, oh Tom. Then the figure moved. That you, Ma? Right over there. Right over here. She stood up and went to meet him. You shouldn't have come. I got to see you, Tom. I got to talk to you. It's near the end of the trail, he said. Somebody might come by. Ain't you got a place, Tom? Yeah, but well, suppose somebody's seen you with me. The whole family be in jam. She says, I got to, Tom. Then she talks to him a while. And then the most famous scene from the movie, Henry Fonda reads this at the very end. Tom's off. It's the oppressed. It's people, hundreds of thousands of people in California who are starving. And he talks. And this is what he has to say. He said, I've been thinking, talking to his mom. Long as I'm an outlaw anyways, maybe I should, hell, I ain't thought it out clear, Ma. Don't worry me now. Don't worry me. They sat silent in the coal black cave of vines. Ma said, how am I going to know about you? She doesn't know where he's going. They might kill you and I wouldn't know. They might hurt you. How am I going to know? Tom laughed uneasily. Well, maybe like Casey says, Casey was the preacher who died, says the fella ain't got a soul of his own. He only got a piece of, and then what? And then what, Tom? Then it don't matter. Then I'll be all around in the dark. I'll be everywhere you look. Wherever there's a fight so hungry people can eat, I'll be there. Wherever there's a cop beating up a guy, I'll be there. Casey knowed. I'll be there in the way guys yell when they're mad, and I'll be in the way kids laugh when they're hungry and they know supper's ready. And when our folks eat the stuff they raise and live in the houses they build, well, I'll be there too. See, God, I'm talking like Casey, the preacher. Something comes of thinking about him so much. Seems like I can see him sometimes. I don't understand, Ma says. I don't really know. Me either, Tom says. It's just stuff I've been thinking about. Get thinking a lot when you ain't moving around. You get that? You got to get back, Ma. You take the money then. He was silent for a moment. All right, he said. And Tom, later when it's blowed over, you'll come back. You'll find us? Sure, he said. Now you better go. Here, give me your hand. He guided her towards the entrance. Her fingers clutched his wrist. He swept the vines aside and followed her out. Go up to the fields till you come to a sycamore on the edge, then cut across the stream. Goodbye. Goodbye, she said, and she walked quickly away. Grapes of Wrath.
Thank you for joining us remotely. That was great. Yeah, don't worry.
Don't leave. It says top reading fans books.
If you hold up your book, just to the right of your head, I'm going to take your picture.
Yes.
Hold on.
Perfect.
Okay, wait. All right, ready? Oh, let's see. I'm trying to not get a glare here. Oh, here we go. All right, ready? 1, 2, 3.
Nice.
Sweet!
I think they might have recorded it. I think this might be recorded as well, I hope.
I'll share the Facebook Live video that we just did. I'll share that with you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of the week.
That was awesome.
Well,